Now let's talk about the land use in the Atlantic forest. So first of all, regarding our arrival and our settlement in the Atlantic forest. So as I mentioned before, we arrived in South America about 14,000 years ago and established in different areas. The first humans arriving here were mostly hunters and gatherers, sometimes fisher gatherers along the coast, and we have archaeological evidence of these fisher gatherers, which are these large shell mounds found especially in southern Brazil, which are called sambaquis, which are these mounds of shells that were collected by these early people that occupied the coast. And also had hunters, and remember that at that time we still had this large animals, especially large mammals that were hunted by the natives, like glyptodonts, which are huge armadillo-like animals, and giant sloths like ground sloths, and really large. And these went extinct at the end of the Pleistocene, or some of them even later on during the Holocene, 6,000 years ago. Anyway, this work here, recent work by Solorzano and collaborators, they divide the occupation and the establishment of human settlements in the Atlantic forest into 6 clashes, as they say. So the first of all is the first wave of people who arrived here, and this lasted at least 5,000 years ago. And the second wave is by slash and burn agriculture. So this practice of just slashing and burning the area to plant crops started a while ago, more than 5,000 years ago, and was really, and it's the longest trend. Like even in the 20th century, you had slash and burn agriculture going on here up until very recently. Okay, so that's a practice that's been going on in the Atlantic forest for a very long time, since the early days. Okay, and it's very important to changes the landscape. Then you have, after the Portuguese arrived here in the 16th century, you have the colonial enterprise early on with the establishment of sugarcane, especially in the northeast of the Atlantic forest, northeast Brazil, and coffee, especially in the southeast. And then we have a real strong change in the landscape, and that, I mean, that's going on until the 19th century, and with the sugarcane especially, and also with the coffee came the slavery, the traffic from Africa that also had very important consequences to our society as well. The fourth clash here represented right after that, or kind of synchronous to the colonial enterprise and part of the colonial enterprise, pastures. Okay, and that led to the introduction of large exotic grazing mammals, so goats and cows and horses. They were introduced, and also the grasses that they feed on also introduced from Africa. So we had a big change there. So we had the introduction of these exotic animals, which are everywhere now, and also the grasses that they use for feeding. Okay. In the 19th century, you have high energy demand. Okay, and then the need of charcoal. That the Atlantic forest goes down to produce charcoal. That, especially in the 19th century, goes on until about the mid 20th century. Then the petroleum replaces charcoal as a main source of energy, and then the demand for charcoal is reduced, but it's not gone. It's still going on. And then you have intense urbanization and industrialization, especially, starting in the 19th century and really strong in the 20th century and all the way to the end of the 20th century. Like I mentioned before, most of the population of Brazil, vast majority is urban today. This is just to give an idea of the indigenous lands in Brazil, how they're distributed and the size. You can clearly see that the Amazon concentrates a lot more indigenous areas than the Atlantic forest or the Cerrado or the other biomes. That's because, when we started, thinking about protecting the indigenous people, this was too late for the Atlantic forest and even the Cerrado. So most of them were gone. Okay, so you have very few indigenous areas. As you can see, 98% of the indigenous lands in terms of area are in the Amazon. So only 1.75% the whole rest of the country, right? We have very few indigenous peoples left along the Atlantic coast. The fragmentation and the reduction of the Atlantic forest started being mapped and calculated by the SOS Mata Atlântica, or SOS Atlantic Forest, which is an NGO in a partnership with the National Institute of Spatial Research, INPE. They started in the 1980s producing an atlas yearly with the amount of forest left. And then you see that there's a very strong tendency to reduce deforestation. So the deforestation has been going down, especially in the 21st century. So here's like 2001, okay? So it has a really strong reduction in the deforestation. Also because of a law. I mean, there's a law that the Atlantic forest cannot be cut, okay, because it reached so low level that it cannot be cut. Before they started mapping, it was said that there was less than 10% of the Atlantic forest left, but these numbers were just like an educated guess, okay? So when they started mapping, then we had a better idea of how much is left, okay? And that's a big question that we still ask. A famous paper by Ribeiro and collaborators in 2009 estimated between 11.5 and 16% of Atlantic forest left. Okay. Unfortunately, most of this, like 80% of the fragments, are very small, less than 50 hectares, so 50 soccer fields. Okay. Half of them are less than 100 meters from edges. Okay, so they're small and their shape has lots of edges. The distance between fragments is high, is almost 1.5 kilometers on average. Okay, so the fragments are small and are far from each other. Protected areas only protect 9% of forest, of remaining forest, and only 1% of the historical range of the Atlantic forest. And 32 to 40% of the fragments are less than 100 hectares, okay? Between 50 and 100, no, 80% are less than 50, and 32 to 40 less than 100 hectares. So, and this is kind of the general distribution. So you see that the Serra do Mar, okay, here and all the way to the mountains in the south, you still have forests because it's hard to get there. The Serra da Mantiqueira, which is this mountain range here at the border between Minas, São Paulo, and Rio, also protected. Some mountain ranges here, the mountains of Espírito Santo, I'm going to show you soon. And then some areas in Bahia, okay, and very few fragments up north and inland here. Here's the Iguaçu area. I'm going to show you in a little bit. And here in the inland, São Paulo and Mato Grosso, very few forests left. A more recent paper had a different number for how much is left. According to them, we have 20%, 28% left, which is 32 million hectares. Why the difference? Well, this is a high resolution map, okay? So this 5-meter resolution gives you a really, so even very small fragments can be counted here, okay? So it's a new land cover map, but a lot of it is degraded, okay? But the good news is that 5.2 million hectares must be restored before 2038, according to the law, okay? So if people do restore that, if they follow the law, we could increase native vegetation up to 35%, okay? The degradation in riparian areas that must be restored is especially high in these red areas here in southeast, in the northeast, and in the west here. And we're in better shape here along the Serra do Mar in the south. Okay. That's the map. You know, you have forests here, you know, same kind of pattern of more remnants on the Serra do Mar, right? On the mountains here, some small patches here in the south of Bahia here. So today, the most recent estimate would give us 28% left of Atlantic forest. But that goes from really degraded forest, secondary forest, to primary forest. And that's another interesting topic because it's the hidden destructions of old forest, old growth forest, the more pristine primary forest. What this work shows is that, as you see, the dark blue here is older forests, like forests that are more than 30 years old. The amount of older forest is actually reducing. This is from 1988 to the present, is reducing and is being replaced by younger forests. So the forest is not, so the Atlantic forest as a whole is not reducing, but the old forests are, and they're giving place to young forest. I mean, that's not very good because usually old forests, pristine forests have more species, have a more complex vegetation structure. So we cannot lose older forests and replace by young forests, okay? And also there's increased forest isolation in 36% of the landscapes. And as you see here, between 1990 and 2017, the light blue is stable forest, no loss, no gain, and no increase in isolation either. So those are the light blue areas. As you go to dark blue, you have forest gain and reduction in isolation, okay? Or forest gain, but no reduction in isolation. So those are usually forest gain and reduction. So you get more forest and then you reduce the isolation of the fragments, okay? Which are the dark blue areas. And then the red one here, you have stable forest cover, but increased isolation, okay? So you increase isolation, you lose, but no increase in isolation. And finally, the dark red here, forest loss and increased isolation, okay? Especially here in the south, okay, in the Araucaria mixed forest here, and also here inland here on the coast of Bahia, okay? So then you're losing forest and getting more isolated. This is the city of Rio, the aerial view of the city of Rio de Janeiro, okay? So this is Rio, there's the Guanabara Bay, okay? That's Niterói on the other side. That's the bridge here, the Governor Island here, the airport. This is the Tijuca National Forest, one of the largest urban forests in the world, okay? Here you have the coastal range here, right? The higher mountains. So you see that we occupy basically everything, you know, all the flatlands are occupied, and then the mountains are sort of protected, okay? This is where I live, Vila Velha, and that's Vitória, the capital of Espírito Santo. So you see here, you have a different pattern. So that's a metropolitan area, not not as large as Rio. Then here you have this is a protected area as well, Duas Bocas Biological Reservation, which is, although it's very close to the city, is really good forest. I mean, some of parts of it are quite pristine still. And then I want to call your attention to this area here, which is the mountains of Espírito Santo. This is all above, 800 to 1,000, maybe 1,200 meters of elevation. And the typical Atlantic forest pattern is this one, okay? Small fragments, isolated, not connected to neighbor fragments, and in a matrix of usually cattle ranches, pastures, and croplands, different croplands. Sometimes have other plants. But here you have a different pattern. You have mostly forest. It's fragmented because there are areas of non-forest, but the matrix is dominated by forest. The non-forest areas are a minority. Okay, so that's a kind of a different landscape from the typical pattern. Here, this is eucalyptus trees. Okay, this is also eucalyptus. This is not native forest. Looks like it, but it's not. And here you see an interesting pattern because the eucalyptus was cut in the flat areas, but they keep riparian forests along the river, native forest along the river. So you see that the native forest is still there, but the eucalyptus was cut. So you get this strange pattern here. That's a different, this is like the semi-deciduous forest. This is the Iguazu region at the border between, here is Brazil, here is Argentina, and here is Paraguay. Okay, I'm going to show you first the Iguazu National Park, the Brazilian part of the park here, the Argentinian part of the park here. So you see, what's left is the protected area. If you go beyond that, there's basically no forest left. Very, very few forests. Very few small, tiny fragments around it. So what's left is the protected area. That's the importance of protected areas. I want to show you also this this huge lake here, which is the Itaipu. The Itaipu Dam is here. It flooded. It was built in the 1970s. It flooded the Iguazu Falls are here, right here. So that's the Iguazu Falls, right? Here you had the Sete Quedas falls that were beautiful, even more impressive than the Iguazu Falls, and they were flooded by with the construction of the Itaipu Dam. The Itaipu Dam is one of the largest and one of the top producers of energy in the world. It's the second largest actually after they built the Three Gorges Dam in China. So the second largest electricity production in the world. This is first of all, this is a comparison of you see here pasture. So see, pastures have decreased in the 21st century, the land covered by pastures, but the land covered by agriculture increased. So it basically replaced pastures with agriculture, right? Native forest is stable. The mosaic of pasture and agriculture is stable. The other things are stable, okay? This is what a preserved forest looks like. So you get all the emergent trees, the canopy trees, palm trees, lots of plants and animals, diversity. Seed dispersers like the tapir are here and dispersing seeds. Top predators like the jaguar are here. So you have a healthy ecological environment, birds, and so you have you have predators, you have prey, you have consumers, woodpecker here. This is what a degraded forest looks like. So you get rid of all the trees, the large trees for wood. So you only get thin trees, no canopy connection. So many species that depend on the canopy do not live here. No emergent trees. Some really common. The diversity reduced. You have less species, and you have a dominant species. Some species dominate the environment. The embaúbas, these trees here, dominate the degraded landscapes. You have grasses because you have more sunlight. You also have ferns dominated sometimes these degraded environments. One big problem in the Atlantic forest is defaunation. So when we lose animals, okay, this is the sort of the main drivers of that. These three are indirect, so habitat loss when you cut the forest, fragmentation, when fragments are small and apart from each other, and also degradation, which is what I showed before, the degraded forest, right? Instead of a healthy forest, unhealthy forest. And then these are direct drivers of defaunation. So collisions with vehicles like cars and buses and trucks, that's a major threat in Brazil. Millions of animals are killed each year in roads. The introduction of exotic species, okay, like cats, predators, and they bring disease. They disrupt the ecological chain of things. The illegal trade of animals. I think I mentioned that before. Hunting is illegal in Brazil overall since the 1960s. So you cannot have legal hunting, or only in very specific places and specific animals, but very restricted. So the trade of native species is forbidden throughout the country. So hunting, which is illegal, as I could just mention, but still goes on. And then disease, like the yellow fever outbreak, which killed lots of howler monkeys in the Atlantic forest. The defaunation intensity is much higher in the Northeast than in the South and Southeast, okay? For many reasons, historical reasons, and also the size of the forest is smaller. Habitat loss is also stronger in the West here, less strong along the coastal range. Hunting, you have some pockets of hunting here in the Northeast, here in Rio, and then in the South. Invasive species are a major problem, especially here in the Northeast and the South. Emerging diseases like the yellow fever outbreak, which is mapped here in this red areas. Road density, you have more roads here connecting the large cities in São Paulo, Rio, Minas Gerais, which are relevant for collisions. Non-native species, exotic species from other places that are introduced and become plagues, basically. So the wild boar is a major problem, has been introduced in the south of Brazil. This is the potential dispersal of wild boar based on the climatic models. This is the dog and domestic cat are also a major problem. They, especially in protected areas, because they go from the neighborhood into the protected area and they bring disease, they kill animals, so it's a major problem as well. This is the non-native species, records of non-native species. You see many areas along the Atlantic forest. This is plants, vertebrates, and then invertebrates like mosquitoes, vertebrates, fish, reptiles, mammals, many very high concentration in Rio here. Trees, you have a high concentration in the south here and the northeast. And the mosquitoes, you have a high concentration in the interior area here. And this is to show that this non-native species introduction is a recent phenomenon. Okay, this is 1950s, 75, and the 2000s. So you see that 2000s, the number of records is up very highly, and the number of species, the richness of species, of non-native species also goes up. So the different species are being introduced at a faster rate in recent years. And finally, environmental disasters unfortunately happen, like this one, which was the worst environmental disasters in the recent history of Brazil. In 2015, there's a dam with mining waste. It's an iron mining waste, broke in Minas Gerais and released 50 million cubic meters of tailings of waste into the Rio Doce, the Doce River, and this waste went all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. And 19 people were killed, many injured. 3 villages were destroyed, like this one. You see that the mud just covered the whole village. 500 people were families were homeless. and the slurry moved 700 kilometers through the Doce River into the ocean. So here you see the Doce River mouth in this here Espírito Santo, and when the tailings reached the ocean, and then this is an aerial view of the waste reaching the ocean. That's a disaster. Killed all the fish, and it's a social, economic, and environmental disaster. And there are many, and another mine broke a couple years later. The environmental disaster was not as bad as this one, but the human impact was huge, with hundreds of people dead. So that's a good. This is an alert for how we do things, and the care that we should have for nature and for the Atlantic forest.